Okay, we're going to go over 3 ways that you can solve a quadratic equation. So when solving a quadratic equation, first I see if I can factor it. So to solve by factoring, what you want to do is use the zero product property. So the zero product property is if you multiply two expressions or numbers and it equals 0, that means that A has to be 0 or B has to be 0, because 0 times anything is going to be 0. So if you have something factored and set equal to 0, then you're going to separate both of these factors. So solve each by factoring. So what I'm going to do to solve by factoring is I want to get one side equal to 0. Then I want to factor it. So in this case, you can use the diamond method because it's a trinomial. So I put a times c at the top, so negative 18 goes at the top, and then 7 goes at the bottom, and because this is x squared, I have x and x. So I have to find factors, two numbers that multiply to be negative 18 and add to be a positive 7. In order to get an 18, one of them has to be positive and the other one has to be negative. So factors of 18 are 18 and 1, 3 and 6, and 2 and 9. So I'm going to use 2 and 9, and the 9 is going to be positive and the 2 is going to be negative. So now I factor this out into x minus 2, x plus 9 equals 0. So I'm going to use a zero product property and set each one of these factors equal to 0 and solve for x. So x equals 2, if I add 2, and x equals negative 9. So check your answers by taking 2 and plugging it in for x. So is 2 squared plus 7 times 4, is that equal to 18? Yes, it is, because 4 plus 14 equals 18. And you can do the same thing with negative 9. Okay, B, solve by factoring. So I'm going to get one side equal to 0 again. So 2x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. I can recognize right now that there is a greatest common factor. So even if you don't take out the greatest common factor when you're solving this, you can still get the right answer. I'm just going to keep my numbers a little bit smaller. So again, I can use the diamond method at the bottom right here. So factors of a times c. So disregard the 2 right now. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. And then 2 goes on the bottom. And then because this is x squared, I'm going to put x in both of these positions. So I have to think of factors of negative 3 that add up to positive 2. So the only factors of 3 are positive 3 and negative 1. That would work. So I'm going to have 2 times x plus 3, x minus 1 equals 0. So I'm going to set each one of these factors equal to 0. So I'm going to have x equals negative 3 and 1. Because if I solved x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 1 equals 0, I have negative 3 and 1. And I'm not going to set 2 equal to 0 because 2 doesn't equal 0. Okay, C, solve by factoring. I'm going to get one side equal to 0. So 16x squared minus 8x equals 0. Then I can do greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor is going to be 8x equals 0. So I can divide this by 8x to get 2x, and this by 8x to get 1. So I'm going to set each one of these equal to 0. So I have 8x equals 0 and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So the reason I can set this 8x equal to 0 is because it has an x. Okay, this one didn't have an x, so I can't set 2 equal to 0 because 2 does not equal 0. But I could set 8x equal to 0. So I'm going to solve for x. So divide by 8, so x equals 0. And if I add 1, 2x equals 1, x equals 1/2. So what you want to do is just take your calculator, plug in, well, 0 would work, plug these in, and then plug in a half into both the left and the right hand side and see if the left and right hand side equal each other. Another way that you can solve that doesn't work for all types of quadratics, just like factoring will not work for all types of quadratics because you can't factor everything, is solving by square roots. So the only time that you can solve for square roots, using square roots, is when b equals 0. So in none of these will you have an x term. So what I'm going to do when I solve for here is I want to isolate the x squared. So I'm going to add 25 to each side. And then I'm going to divide by 4. So x squared equals 25 over 4. So at this point, the inverse of x squared is square rooting. So my solution is going to be x equals plus or minus. Now the reason it can be negative or positive because a negative squared is a positive number and a positive squared is a positive number. And I'm going to take the square root of the numerator and the denominator. So the answer is plus or minus 5/2. And again, you can check your answers and plug them in. Just make sure that you plug in parentheses when you're checking. Okay, letter B, I'm going to isolate the x squared again. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3 to get x squared equals 8. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So it's going to be x equals, and again, it's plus or minus the square root of 8. So I can break down the square root of 8. So 8 is 2 and 4. And 4 is 2 and 2. And I circle the primes. And I put them underneath the square root. So 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. So if you remember to simplify a square root, you're going to take them out in groups of 2. So I'm going to put 1 on the outside and 1 on the inside. So you take them out in groups of 2 because technically this is the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So my answer is going to be plus or minus 2 root 2. And then C, I want to isolate the x squared, so it's going to be x squared equals 1/4. So x equals square root, plus or minus 1/2. So there's my answer. Okay, then solve each by graphing. Okay, we're going to graph it. So what you're going to do to solve by graphing, you can solve any equation by graphing that, as long as you're not trying to find imaginary solutions, which we're going to do later on. But to solve any equation by graphing, you press y equals in your graphing calculator, and you put one side in your y1 and the other side in your y2, and you want to see where they intersect. So open up your graph and write y equals on your graphing calculator and type in x squared minus x, and then in your y2 you're going to type in 4. So when I hit graph, my graph looks like there's a horizontal line at 4, and then there is the parabola that looks like this. And when you're solved by graphing, what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out where these two curves or lines, these functions, intersect. So there's 2 intersection points. So that means that this equation has 2 solutions. So on your calculator, you're going to go to second trace. So press second button, which is on the left-hand side, and then press trace at the top. and you have choices of value, 0, minimum, maximum, and intersect. So you're going to hit the intersect. So once you select intersect, there's this blinking cursor, and you want to move your cursor to where they intersect. So move your right and left arrow keys to approximately where they intersect, and then you press enter 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And it'll ask you first curve, second curve, guess. And then my intersection, my answer is going to be the x-coordinate, so it is about -1 point, rounding the nearest hundredth, so it's 2 decimals, -1.24 is a solution. And I want to do that process again, so I press second trace, and the choice go down to intersect, and you want to move your cursor using the left and right arrows to approximately where these two cross. So keep your cursor right over here, it's blinking, and then press enter 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and you'll get 3.24. So the two solutions are approximately 1.24 and 3.24. So same thing with letter B. So letter B, you're going to put this part in Y1 and this part in Y2. So I'm going to press pause and do that. Now, if you have a TI 84 or an 83, it will be hard. You won't be able to see there's a horizontal line on the x-axis. So mine is colored. So right now I have a red line on the x-axis, and then I have a blue parabola. And you can barely see that they're crossing twice, but actually they are crossing twice. What you can do is you can press the zoom button at the top and just zoom in, and you can see easier that they're crossing twice. So right here it's crossing, and approximately right here. So to get those, remember you go to second, so the second button on the left hand side, and then the trace button at the top, and then you're going to slide over to intersect. So second, trace, intersect. And you want to move your blinking cursor to over here, and you press enter 3 times. So you don't have to be exactly right on it, but you need to be pretty close. So and 1, 2, 3, and it's -0.81. So x is approximately -0.81. And then do the same process again. Second, trace, intersect. And press enter again 3 times. It's because it's crossing twice. So sometimes you have to move in to show that it crosses twice. So it's so it's 0.31. So the other solution is 0.31.